Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport, and this is a very late review of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix that saw out the Formula 1 2022 season. And it is late because I wanted to watch the Formula 2 and all the Macau races, and I did watch the start of the World Cup, and I've had a few chores to do as well. But I did watch the race live. It was a fair few hours ago, so I should have formulated my thoughts in my mind, and I'm now going to tell you what they are. And honestly, there isn't a lot because pretty much everything had been settled before this race. But we'll go through a few of the moments and a few things going into 2023 and whatnot. I'll start with Formula 2 because I think all eyes were on Logan Sargent to finish in the top 6 in the championship to secure his Formula 1 drive with Williams next year. And he did it pretty handily. He scored points in both races. He wasn't outstanding, but he did do what was required. He was a driver I completely wrote off. I think only a couple of years ago. I think he had a pretty dodgy Formula 3 season, and I said this guy has no hope of even getting to Formula 2. Well, he got to Formula 2, he's done okay, and now he's got a Formula 1 drive. So once again, I am completely wrong about pretty much everything. As for the season, Felipe Drugovich in the end won by over 100 points, which is pretty incredible, and yet he's not getting a Formula 1 race seat. He is a reserve driver, but it does annoy me slightly that the winner and someone who won so dominantly doesn't get a Formula 1 seat, but the guy who finished third, he does. But that's just how motor racing works. Teo Pourchaire, I think, will be very disappointed with the end of his season has been terrible. I think he was in championship contention for most of the season. The last 8 races, he scored 5 points. That's terrible. I'm almost amazed he finished second in the championship. And Felipe Drugovich just left him completely behind in the end. So that was Formula 2 anyway. Roy Nissany scored points in both races at Abu Dhabi, which I think is a sign of the apocalypse, but I guess we'll have to see on that one. As for Macau, brilliant racing. I'm not going to go through all of it because there was a lot of it. Massive crashes as always, great racing. I think there were a few injuries, which wouldn't be surprising, and it's still one of the best racetracks in the world. It would be terrible if Formula 1 raced there because it is not suited to Formula 1 cars at all. In fact, that really tight hairpin, I don't even think you can get a Formula 1 car around it. But for touring cars, GT cars, Formula 4, motorcycles, it's a brilliant track. And if you have never watched any Macau races before, do it this year. The racing was great. Every race was pretty much spectacular. The only problem with Macau is you get such a, especially at the moment because you don't have the European drivers. There were a few, but not many. But you get this real big gap in talent between drivers. So some races were won by like 10, 15 seconds. But otherwise, it was a very competitive weekend at Macau. So, Formula 1. No big surprises in qualifying. We had the 2 Red Bulls, 2 Ferraris, and 2 Mercedes. Nothing really to say about that. That's sort of how you could see it happening. I mean, you could argue Mercedes should have been quicker, but it was a fair enough representation of where those teams are. The race itself, Lewis Hamilton got off to a good start. He got into 4th place, but in the process, he went over a curb trying to defend against Carlos Sainz, and he got launched into the air. And there are some questions of whether or not that damaged his car because immediately he had to let Sainz back through, and pretty much immediately got back past him. But then, rather than pull away, he came back to Sainz, and Sainz and Russell both overtook him, and then Hamilton just kept dropping and dropping and dropping. So he himself said he thought he had damage to his floor, but there was nothing seemingly wrong with his car. And over the second phase of the race, he was pretty quick. He was catching up to Russell, who had his own troubles with a pit stop, and it all looked good for Hamilton to finish 5th, which would have been good enough for 5th in the championship. Sainz was catching him at a pretty quick pace. So, I mean, Hamilton could have held on to 4th, but I think Sainz would have got him. But then a hydraulic issue he can't change gears, and Hamilton was out of the race, which ends a pretty terrible year for him. And not only that, but he didn't finish 5th in the championship, he finished 6th, which is the lowest he's ever finished in a Formula 1 World Championship. It's the first time in Formula 1 that he has not won a race in a season. In fact, the last time he won a race was Saudi Arabia 2021. His next opportunity to win a race is Bahrain 2023, which is a gap of about 455 days. So, I mean, obviously that's by far the longest in his Formula 1 career. It's not going great, and Mercedes have obviously vowed that they're going to come back stronger than ever, but it's going to be interesting to see if they can, or will Red Bull continue to run away with it in the way Mercedes did not that long ago. This season has been far too easy for Max Verstappen. He has blown the competition away, and it's strange because the Red Bull in the hands of Sergio Perez does not look really any quicker than the Ferraris. And yet Max Verstappen just seems to keep driving. And you can say the same about Lewis Hamilton when Mercedes were on top. It's different because even then Nico Rosberg and even Valtteri Bottas at times, although Bottas not always, but usually Rosberg was very much clear in second, even if he was behind Hamilton. Perez hasn't been, and Perez isn't a bad driver. So it's just been a complete blitz of the field. 15 wins in 22 races. That's shockingly good. He has dominated the season. And he's so far clear. I think I worked it out that Charles Leclerc would need 8 more races without Max Verstappen turning up. And that is an incredible margin to win by. Because Charles Leclerc, again, is no slouch. Everyone in the top 5 won a race this year. So even though Max Verstappen took 15 wins, Charles Leclerc only took 3, Perez took 2, and 1 apiece for Sainz and Russell. Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes all had race wins, although Mercedes only had 1. And actually, to be honest, Ferrari only had 4. So Red Bull had an incredible 17 wins. It's no wonder they won the Constructors' Championship. Ferrari finished second in the Constructors, but Charles Leclerc did beat Perez to finish second in the World Championship, which I believe is Charles Leclerc's best finish. I don't think he's matched it before. So it's not all bad news, but he should have been in title contention. And it took a while for Sergio Perez to catch up. I think he got caught in a bit of traffic here and there, and he wasn't quick enough to catch back up to Leclerc after he pitted. But he was close, and it has been a good season from both drivers, although they both have made mistakes at times. George Russell finishes the championship in 4th, and he wasn't really a factor in this race. He was behind both Red Bulls and both Ferraris, possibly for the majority of the race, or possibly even all of it. But he has done enough to finish 4th in the championship, which in his first year in a front-running car is a really incredible job. And I can't really fault George Russell at all. And I think there's only a couple of races where he finished outside the top 5, which is incredible consistency. And it is a strength of Mercedes that they don't break down until Hamilton did today. That's the first retirement due to mechanical issues this year for a Mercedes. When you consider Ferrari have like 5 or 6, you can tell where they lose points. And even Red Bull, I think Red Bull only had a couple. Maybe, they definitely had more. So Mercedes' bulletproof reliability is a massive boon to them. But even so, George Russell has been driving incredibly well. He's beaten his teammate, his more experienced and very successful teammate. I don't even think he was really close at the end. I think he was like 35, 40 points behind. So that was that settled. Further back, we had the battle between McLaren and Alpine. McLaren needed a fair amount of points to catch them. Alonso did break down in his final Alpine appearance, but Alpine still finished 4th in the Constructors. Norris was clear of everyone else in the midfield in 7th. Ocon and Alonso were behind him 8th and 9th. Nowhere near, they weren't going to catch him anyway. Bottas did enough to finish 10th, although the second half of his season has been absolutely dreadful. I think he's finished the season with like 39 points. He scored 36 of them in like the first 8 races, and then 3 in the next 14. Absolutely absurd form from Alfa Romeo. And behind him you have the usual Ricciardo, Vettel, Stroll. I think Stroll's 15th or 16th. It hasn't been a great season for him. I don't really know what I was expecting from him. Tsunoda got points this one as well, which I think it's been a bad season in reality, but then AlphaTauri have been really off the pace, and Gasly has been very unimpressive of late. So next year is going to be interesting for both Alpine and AlphaTauri, and Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo, because I think they're all going to be pretty close together. And maybe even McLaren as well. We'll have to see about Williams and Haas. Haas are another interesting one, because the start of this year, they looked pretty good. It hasn't really managed. They have not managed to keep the momentum throughout the whole year, and it's been poor for a while. Getting rid of Mick Schumacher and bringing in Nico Hülkenberg is very short-sighted. Yes, he's probably a more stable driver and makes less mistakes. Mick didn't make a mistake at this race. He did tag Latifi round, but I don't think Hülkenberg's the right direction. I don't think he's so much better than Schumacher. You're going to see a big difference, and you're going to get 1 or 2 years out of him, whereas Mick Schumacher you could have built up as a Haas guy, and I'm disappointed they ditched him for Hülkenberg. And I honestly, from there, I don't know where else they'll go. Albon, he looks pretty decent at times. I think he was running as high as 12th, which in the Williams is good, but he didn't score any points again, and it's been another bad year for Williams. Latifi, I think he finished last of the finishers, and his final race, I don't think he'll ever be back to Formula 1. I think his time is definitely done. It's been, in the years prior, I've defended him, saying you can't compare him to George Russell, because George Russell was always built as the wonder kid, and he has kind of proved that. He has lived up to that. Nicholas Latifi was always just there, and he got slated last season because he made a couple of mistakes and he didn't really do much throughout the year. And I said it, like, he's consistently finishing races. He's doing a decent enough job to be given the chance to race in Formula 1, and he deserves better things from the car if Williams can push forward. This year has been abysmal. He's crashed at nearly every race. I mean, that's probably not fair. He has crashed a lot, and he did luckily score some points, but he is still last in the Drivers' Championship, which ultimately isn't unsurprising. It's about where Williams are, but Nicholas Latifi has just... he's taken over from Mazepin. Like, where Mazepin was last year, Latifi is this year. And I think with Mazepin gone, maybe Latifi's accidents were more noticeable, but he has been by far the worst driver on the grid. And it's not really that sad to see him go. I do think he deserves to be replaced. And it's going to be interesting to see what Logan Sargent can do in that car, because Logan Sargent does crash quite a lot as well. In Formula 2 he has. There was a point where he was in title contention and he then crashed something like 3 or 4 times over the next 6 races. So he's going to be interesting to see what he does in the Formula 1 car. But that was it. Sebastian Vettel, obviously he scored points in his final race. Alonso retired in his final race for Alpine. Ricciardo scored points in his final race, possibly from Formula 1. He hasn't officially announced his retirement, and he will be a Red Bull reserve driver, which I don't think they'll ever give him a drive, but he'll be there. And I'm sure he'll be helpful to the team, and obviously he was there for a long time, he knows them. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Ricciardo in the future. And that's pretty much it. It wasn't a great race by any standards. Some of the strategy choices were interesting, but on track, again, it's a very DRS circuit. 2 long straights to overtake on, and not much else. It's not. I hate Yas Marinas. It's a terrible track, or at least it doesn't suit Formula 1. It's boring. It's never been interesting. But at least this year we avoided controversy, I guess. We go into next year. There are 24 races. The grid is already set, and I will be doing more content on Formula 1 in the future and in the gap in between. As for everything else, there is not a lot of motorsport still on in 2022. We have Extreme E and World Touring Cars coming to an end next week. And then the week after that, we have Supercars and the Tasman Series coming to an end. And then the week after that, Brazilian Stock Car comes to an end. And that's pretty much it for 2022. But shortly after that, we have Formula 4 UAE, Formula Regional Asia, the Asian Le Mans Series, Toyota Racing Series, Race of Champions. We have Formula E starting again, Nitro Rallycross, Trophy Andros I'm sure is on at some point. So January is packed with motorsport. We're not going to be short of things to talk about. And I'll be doing other stuff as well. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thank you to everyone who already has. It's very much appreciated. I'm trying for 6 videos next week, but whether they all get done or not, we'll see. There'll be at least 4 or 5. So yeah, 100% definitely subscribe. Now is the time to do it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the 2022 Formula 1 season and my reviews of pretty much every race. I don't think I missed any this year. They haven't all been great, I will say. I think on track the racing still leaves a lot to be desired. The new cars have not been what we were promised. But there's always hope for a future, a few tweaks to the regulations. We'll see how they work out. New drivers to talk about as well. I'm very, very excited. So thank you very much for watching and have a good one.